right, new section, new lesson. So we're going to look at solving equations, and when we are solving equations, what I would like to do is go through, I'm going to show you using a single example. I'm going to show you 4 different ways to get it done. Okay, so first of all, we're going to list the 4 ways. I'm going to try factoring first. Okay, so notice that this is a quadratic equation. Okay, quadratic means your biggest exponent is a 2. So this makes a parabola when I graph it. It either opens up and it looks like a U, or it opens down and it looks like the St. Louis Arch. Okay, so this is the equation of a parabola. When I solve it and set it equal to 0, what I'm actually finding is where it hits the x-axis. So for instance, if I was graphing this one, okay, it could hit twice. So when you solve for x, you're telling me what hits the x-axis. On this one, I'm just writing random stuff. Okay, it could hit once. And then we're going to find out a different issue later on is what happens when it doesn't hit at all. Okay, so first strategy that we're going to use is if we can factor it, that's usually going to be our fastest way out. So if I'm going to factor this thing, what I'm looking for then is I want it set equal to 0, and then we're going to try factoring it. Okay, so let's do that now. Actually, let's not. Let's finish summarizing. The second way we're going to go is completing the square. And when we complete the square, we want the variables on one side equal to the number. In other words, if I was looking at this, I would keep the variables over here, but I would subtract 5 from both sides. Okay. The third way that we're going to go is by using square root method. And the fourth way that we're going to try, and this is going to be a chunk of parentheses squared equals to a number. That number can be 0, okay? But a chunk squared equals a number. And then the final way that we're going to work this through is everybody's favorite quadratic formula. Okay, so when I look at this first one. If I'm going to factor it, I want it equal to 0. Sorry, quadratic formula also needs to be equal to 0. And it is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so we're going to try factoring first. So I'm just going to write this stuff in red. So I'm going to go ahead and take this thing and I'm going to factor it. So if I have x squared plus 6x plus 5, and that's going to equal 0. I need 2 numbers that multiply to 5, but when I add them together, I get 6. So my options are 5 and 1, and what do you know? When I add them together, I get a 6. So I have x plus 5, x plus 1 equals 0. Okay? So now what do? I've got 2 things being multiplied together, and my answer is 0. So what I would like to look at is what can these things be? So think about it this way. I'm going to come back over here for a second. If I have 2 times some number and my answer is 0, what does that number have to be? Okay, it has to be 0. So 2 times 0 is 0. So 0 times 14 is 0. 0 times anything is 0. So what I have here is I got this chunk times this chunk equals 0. That means one of those chunks needs to be 0. So I'm going to separate them out and take chunk number 1 and say what makes you 0. And then I've got chunk number 2, what makes you be 0. And now I'm going to subtract 5. So I find out that x is negative 5. Or I subtract 1 and x is negative 1. So here's what you found out. First of all, come back up here for a second. If I substitute in for this, okay, negative 1 squared is 1. 6 times negative 1 is negative 6 plus 5. So what does that give me? 1 minus 6 plus 5 is 0. You found a value for x that will make this thing spit out a 0. Let's try negative 5. Negative 5 times negative 5 is 25. 6 times negative 5 is negative 30. So 25 minus 30 plus 5 is 0. Okay, so you found the two values for x that will make this thing equal 0. You can also use direct substitution here. So shove in a negative 5 here. Negative 5 plus 5 is 0. Negative 5 plus 1 is negative 4. So 0 times negative 4 is, guess what? 0. So now try it with negative 1. Negative 1 plus 5 is 4. Negative 1 plus 1 is 0. So 4 times 0 is 0. So what that means is if I were to graph this thing, you will find out that it hits the axis at negative 5 and negative 1. And so your parabola looks somewhat like that, which is really a bad drawing. But there you go. Okay. So what I have now is I've just completed this thing by factoring. So now let's complete the square. So if I complete the square, I'm going to start off by subtracting 5 from both sides. So I'm going to get all my variables equals the number. So I've got x squared plus 6x equals negative 5. So what did I do? I subtracted 5 from both sides. And now I'm going to do what's called completing the square. How do I complete the square? Take half of what is your middle term. So remember 6x was in the middle. Half of 6x is 3. Just take half of the number. Half of 6 is 3. Square it. So half of 6 is 3. Squared is 9. Okay, so I have created a 9, and I'm going to create it on both sides. I can do anything I want to as long as I do it to both sides. And now I'm going to try factoring. But don't just ignore this side for a second. So do I know two numbers that multiply to 9, but they add up to 6? Yes, I do. It is x plus 3 times x plus 3. So let's write that down for just a second. And then negative 5 plus 9 is 4. Okay, so what's a shortcut if I'm multiplying two things together? I can use exponents, which means instead of writing x plus 3 times x plus 3, I can be a lazy math person and write x plus 3 squared. Okay, so that's what we mean when we say complete the square. In algebra, this is a perfect square because when I factor it down, I get something times itself. Okay, so now I'm at this x plus 3 squared equals 4. And wouldn't you notice that lands me right here. So I got this chunk squared equals a number. So there's my chunk squared equals a number. So I can complete the square to get to a position where I can use this method. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump down here because I have now learned how to complete the square, which allows me to use this method. Okay, so what have I got? If I've got x plus 3 squared equals 4, I'm going to take a square root of both sides. I can do anything I want to as long as I do it to both sides. So what I notice is that I've got a chunk squared. I want to kill that square. So what's the opposite of squaring something? It is square rooting. And so that's going to allow me to get that x out of parentheses. So I've got an x plus 3 equals, and now I need to take the square root of 4, but we're going to do a positive root and a negative root. So another thing you're going to get sick and tired of me saying is anytime during the process of solving a problem that you take a square root, do not forget your plus minus. I only need it on one of them. Okay, so what's the square root of 4? It's 2, but don't forget your plus minus. So what's my goal? I'm trying to get x by itself. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. So I get x equals positive 2 minus 3 is negative 1. Negative 2 minus 3 is negative 5. So what two answers did I get up here? I got negative 5 and negative 1. What two answers did I get down here? I got negative 5 and negative 1. So your process works. Now let's try the quadratic formula. So if I have, this is my A, this is my B, and this is my C. So make sure you're in descending order. So my A, I'm too lazy to write, is a 1. My B is 6, and my C is 5. You're just looking at the coefficients. And now I'm going to fill this in down here. So quadratic formula is all fun. You know, it's not bad. It's just, I think it's everybody's least favorite just because it starts off looking complicated. So what I have then is x equals negative b. Well, what's my b? My b is 6. So what's the opposite of 6? It's negative 6. So I've got negative 6 plus or minus, look, there's your plus minus when you're taking a square root, okay? The square root of b squared. So what is b, 6, squared, 36. So I've got 36 minus 4 times 1 times 5. All over 2 times 1. Okay, you cannot see what I'm writing. All right, so I've got b squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 5. So I'm going to clean up underneath this radical, and I'm going to clean up my denominator. So I've got a negative 6 plus or minus. The square root of 36 minus 20 is 16 over 2. So 36 minus 4 times 1 times 5. So 36 minus 20 is 16. Well, I know what the square root of 16 is. It's 4. So I have negative 6 plus or minus 4 over 2. So now I got negative 6 plus 4 is negative 2. Negative 6 minus 4 is negative 10. Both of those are over 2. And this reduces to negative 1. And that reduces to negative 5. So I did it 3.5, because completing the square was just a method to get us to here. And I got the same answers. So bottom line is that when we tell you to solve one of these things, is our mission, giving you 4 different options, is how can I get to my answer quickest? So you may want to factor, you may want to complete the square, you want to try square root method or quadratic formula, but we're going to practice a few of these, and then you'll be done with this week's stuff.